Hello, this is Darren Pulsipher, Chief Solution Architect of Public Sector at Intel, and welcome to Embracing Digital Transformation, where we investigate effective change leveraging people, process, and technology. On today's episode, Securing the Data Center Through the Edge, with special guests Tom Garrison and Camille Morhardt. We have a special episode today where we have fellow podcasters from Intel, Tom Garrison, VP of Client Security, and Camille Morhardt, Director of Security Initiatives and Communications. Tom, Camille, welcome to the show.
Hi, good to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks, guys, for coming. You guys are podcast experts as well. I'm glad another podcaster got to come onto my show. They host Cybersecurity Inside for Intel. Welcome to Embracing Digital Transformation. We have security experts here, finally.
Yeah, and whenever we come on to another podcaster, it's like the pre-meeting, the AV check is all about what kind of camera do you use and what's your microphone.
That is 100% true. I'm getting your guys' camera. You got a lot better camera than I do. So, but we all have the same mic, so we must there must be something about it.
It's good stuff.
So, hey, let's not talk about podcasting because we could have a lot of fun doing that. Let's talk a little bit about security. You guys both come from the client security world, something I don't really address too much on my show. I'm mostly in the data center, in the enterprise, in the cloud, but we all know, getting to the client, if we can't secure the client, then we can't secure the enterprise.
That's exactly right. I mean, you can't think about security in a myopic way. You have to think about it holistically. So from the cloud and that whole infrastructure within the cloud environment, all the way, out to the edge. And, Camille and I have had the pleasure of hosting our podcast, and where we focus a lot on trying to tackle security, but to do so in a very approachable way, so that people don't need to necessarily be a security expert to learn something, and hopefully walk away with a deeper understanding of whatever the topic is. And obviously we try to have fun along the way as well.
Having fun is key to making these podcasts interesting, that's for sure. I'm glad you said that I'm not going to use the word dumb it down, but that's what you said without saying it, for normal people to actually secure what's going on. This has been a big deal. I know a lot of people have called me about this problem since COVID hit, because our attack surface is now in everyone's home.
No, for sure. I'll just maybe use a different word. And what we try to do with any of the topics isn't to dumb it down, as you said, right? The idea is talk about it in language where you don't have to be an insider to understand it.
I like that better.
And so the goal for us is not to sort of brush things under the table because they're too complicated. It's really about saying, hey, these are really complicated topics. Let's have a real conversation and not just talk about jargon or, inside speak. But you mentioned specifically around working from home, and that's opened up a whole series of new uses and use models. For example, the client before in the old days would ship directly to an IT cage somewhere. It would get configured, and then IT would bless you with a brand new laptop at some point. And that doesn't happen anymore, right? If the employee never comes into the work site, now these devices need to show up at somebody's doorstep, and you have to be able to provision them, make sure that they're safe, they haven't been tampered with. And so there's a lot to unpack there. And Camille and I, like I said, we have done several episodes on that front, as well as more broadly supply chain. And that's been in the news a lot, right? People talking about supply chain, and they're worried that they can't get their Christmas gifts in time and all those kinds of things. But when you think about it from a security standpoint, supply chain, especially when you have less control over devices and how they get deployed, you need to make sure that you understand the state of your device, your PC. And so there's a lot of focus in the industry about how do I solve that problem? It's a particularly challenging problem to solve.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. And the fact that we did it so quickly. When COVID hit, it was crazy how fast IT kept everything up and going. And onboarding new people during COVID, it's got to be a very complex problem to solve.
Yeah, I think it's both a blessing and a curse. If we had just gone naturally,
it would take years.
It would have taken years, if not maybe never. But the fact that we were pushed into, we really had no alternative. Now think of how open and I guess, open is the right word. How open we are to working from home, to being on video, to connecting. You don't have to get on an airplane anymore and fly around and still have a productive meeting. You can still see body language. Is it quite as good as face-to-face? No, but it's pretty darn good. And it's way better than the old-fashioned phone call.
Yeah, I agree. Camille, what about you? What have you seen as far as what COVID has done to security and how that's changed the way we work?
Well, there's a couple different things that I was thinking of as you guys were talking. And one of them is I used to work in the Internet of Things group. And, we would wonder then about, well, some of these devices need to get deployed, before we provision them. They're getting attached to the roof of a building or windmill or an underground mine. They don't have constant connectivity. Sometimes that's by design. You're trying to preserve battery life and send little snippets of information. Sometimes it's in order to try to reduce the amount of potential attack surface area. Like if it's a medical device inside your body, you don't really want it to be connected all the time. And it's been interesting because all of that was kind of, literally on the edge of what we were trying to solve. And then COVID hit and it was suddenly like the center of IT. We used to talk about the crossover between, or the intersection of OT and IT and how that was going to play out. And then COVID hit and it was like, nope, this is a central focus of all enterprise IT departments right now, all of a sudden. Yeah. That was a very quick change.
It was, and I know with some of my customers, they were battling with that OT-IT bridge and how to do it. And when COVID hit, they kind of collapsed that down. And we've seen as a result, breaches in security.
Yeah, well, certainly that as a lot of people rolled it out and dealt with security later, depending on kind of the maturity level of the organization. And it also seems like this giant shift to all cloud. And I'm kind of wondering now if there's any, I don't want to say backlash, that's not the right word, but is there any pendulum coming just a little bit back or any additional consideration?
Yeah, we're already seeing it because of some of the attacks that we've seen recently with ransomware attacks. Some of those were out in the cloud, primarily because people didn't understand the shared responsibility of security in the cloud. And now we're seeing organizations think twice about moving their critical data into the cloud. They may move some workloads there, but they're keeping the golden data at home. So we're seeing some of that happen just over the last 6 months.
The other thing that's kind of come to my attention recently in some of the conversations Tom and I've had on the cybersecurity inside is just the importance of perception as well as actually what you're doing. So you may be asking the right hardware questions about the physical security of the servers if you're going to be moving data there. And you might be asking the right software layers of protection questions. But you also have to now consider what the perception is to your customers of where you're keeping your data and why, and who's protecting it and how they're protecting it.
Oh, I totally agree. And frankly, I think a lot of organizations can't answer those questions. A lot of times they don't even know where their data is. So
Yeah, that's pretty scary.
That's a bigger
yeah.
problem.
Well,
But you know what? Part of what this raises is when, when there are questions that you can't answer, it's a great starting point for what work you still have to accomplish. Because now you realize, oh my gosh, I really do need to know where my data is. And if I don't even know where it is, how do I even know if it's safe?
yeah. I totally agree. And you know what? It's been exacerbated by video conferencing. I hate to say that because I use the platform quite a bit. All my podcasts have been on via Zoom now. But the problem is when people are recording these meetings, and where are those recordings going?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I told to save it on my laptop. Great, it's on your laptop. It's also in the cloud somewhere. Who has access to it? What are the protections? How long is it sticking around? What's the, all the, there's a lot that is starting to just now come up that we haven't really addressed as an industry yet. It'll be interesting to see what happens with that.
Well, and part of, again, it's not really all that, I would say, sexy or interesting or whatever, but just some of the basics when it comes to security are things like, do you know if your machine is vulnerable to any known exploits? Just something simple, right? And by the way, this applies just as much to servers as it does to clients.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you have technically sophisticated, cloud service providers and that are very, very attuned to these sort of threats and the underlying question of, am I safe or not? But it turns out that the answer to is my machine safe or not is harder to get to the answer because of behavioral challenges that we've uncovered with COVID. And one of those challenges is there are a lot of IT shops out there that are hesitant to update systems. They do not want to take a system down, whether it's a server or a client. And just the nature of rebooting the machine, maybe something's going to happen in that update process and it's going to take that machine offline. And so they do the unthinkable. They just sort of bury their head in the sand and hope that their machine doesn't get attacked. And what we're trying to do, I think, as an industry, certainly Intel on the forefront, is to say, don't do that. Don't make that mistake. And it's part of our job working with our partners and fellow travelers in the industry to make that update a simpler, higher trust type activity where people have confidence that it really does work. It really will, keep your machine safe, and you won't have some of those, pitfalls that maybe people experienced 10 years ago or something. Or even 5 years ago. Those things, as an industry, we've come huge strides forward in making the update process much more systematic, much more predictable. And we're trying to train people that they need to have the mindset that says security doesn't stop when the device is shipped from a manufacturer to a customer.
Yeah.
Security is something that continues over the life of the device. And that means that the nature of attacks, what is world-class at the time of when the machine first ships, is not world-class 3 years into it or 4 years after.
Or even 6 months.
Or even 6 months.
Yeah.
And so companies need to have a systematic, twice a year is what we're advocating, twice a year process to update their machines and keep them safe.
Well,
Most
Tom,
attacks that we hear, most attacks are from very, very old exploits that the attackers realize probably weren't mitigated, and therefore it's fair game. So they're easy to kind of go and attack machines. Go ahead,
well, Tom, I want to go back to something, because you were saying part of the goal here is to make it easier. I mean, everybody would like to do the update. They just get nervous because things might happen that are unexpected, and then you've got a problem. So, but you're your group works with companies to sort of pre-validate and test. I mean, in environments where we can get a sense of whether there's going to be a problem at fairly large scale. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Because there's the only way to know for sure is to validate at scale. And so hundreds and thousands of machines that we do either within our own labs or with the OEM partners, and they're in the labs scattered all over the world. We do exhaustive validation to make sure, A, that the mitigations actually work. So they protect against what they were supposed to, whatever vulnerability was discovered. So does it work? And then B, that it does no harm for the rest of the system in working with applications and the things that it would normally do. And that is a significant investment that Intel's made. And in partnering and collaborating with our ecosystem partners. And obviously with Intel at the scale that we're at, this is something that is sort of in our nature, right? We're good at driving standards across the industry and so forth, and we've done it for decades. This is the next sort of evolution of that, doing it at scale across not just Intel, but all of our partners.
So, listening to you guys talk about this, we have the Wednesday reboot at Intel. It drives me absolutely batty, right? Because I have to reboot my machine every Wednesday, Thursday. It's always at the most inconvenient time for me. So how are you going to train the users? Because you can train the IT organizations, hey, this is important to do these patch updates every 6 months or so. But when push comes to shove, it's the end users a lot of times that are dragging their feet on, hey, my machine works fine. Everything's working fine. So what can you do to help, the users? Because a lot of times it requires me to say, yeah, go ahead and reboot.
Yeah, it's a great question. And we're working on exactly the problem that you just said. And by the way, IT gets around the defer problem.
Oh, I know they do, because my machine reboots in the middle of
right. Exactly. They'll give you a defer option until Wednesday at like 4 in the afternoon, and then you don't get a choice. So, but that user experience is terrible, right? And so what we're actually working on is the ability to do these updates, firmware updates in the machine, microcode updates, those kinds of things, and to be able to do it without a reboot.
That's a big deal.
Right, it's a huge deal. And so, unfortunately, it's not something that exists today. But these are the type of use cases and usage models that we're driving with our platforms. And it's exciting because what we're trying to do is take all of the impediments to doing updates and just one by one, making it easier and remove those impediments. And for example, is your machine susceptible to vulnerabilities? That was impediment number one, because people didn't even know, is my machine safe or not, right? And so, taking that a barrier out of the way, moving forward, we'll have the ability to do updates without rebooting. And that's a big deal in servers as well. You've got like cloud service providers, they do not want to reboot those machines if they don't have to. And so this type of technology is not just a client thing by any means. In fact, I would argue it's even more valuable on the server side.
Well, and I can see it extremely valuable in IoT as well. I really don't want, my security camera rebooting, and every Wednesday at 5 o'clock, my security cameras reboot. Someone's going to figure that out, right? And rob you blind. So yeah, I love the idea. That's the first I've heard of it. So this is great news.
I think, in the meantime, I wouldn't underestimate the importance of good communication when you're asking people to do things. It's one thing when you have an IT department that can enforce something, but you don't always have that luxury when you're a company trying to get an update out. I think if you can educate people briefly as to why you're asking them to do it, that can go a long way too. sometimes we forget we have to explain what's the point. Why am I doing this? Why does it benefit me? And then I think often people are reasonable and they want, okay, if we have found a vulnerability and we're requesting an update, otherwise you're open to a potential attack in this area of your device, people say, okay, that sounds reasonable. I'm going to do it now.
I totally agree with you.
Behaviorally though, it's interesting because all of us have cell phones and
they update all the time.
Most of us have no issue whatsoever in updating the cell phone, right? And to the latest OS or whatever. And some of that's forced by Apple or others, but just behaviorally, we don't seem to have as much of an issue with it because it works. It doesn't cause an issue. And so people are more inclined to just go ahead and do it. And I think that's the challenge for us on the PC and the server side, is to have that same kind of an experience where, yeah, you don't mind updating because when you update, things still work,
Well, I think some of that has to do with our usage models that we should be really looking at as an industry. When we have our laptops, we think that the data on that laptop is always going to be there on that laptop. So much so when I trade in my laptop at work, they take a snapshot of my drives, don't they? And they put that in my new laptop. Where with the phone, you only grab the data. The data is in the cloud, right? And when I get a new phone, it just downloads it back onto my phone, and I'm guaranteed that it's there. It's more dynamic. So I think when we start looking at laptops as, I hate to say it, throwaway devices like our phones, even though no one would throw their phone away, but that the data does not reside on that laptop anymore. The data resides in a cloud and can migrate between whatever device I have. Yeah. I think when we get to that point, then maybe it'll be more acceptable by people that are using these laptops.
Yeah, I think we're already at the point where it's very rare that data only exists on a laptop, right?
Yeah, but that mentality is still there, right?
It exists in two places, on the laptop and in the cloud. And also the laptop device is expected to last longer. And people are they're much more sensitive to laptops because they do real work on a laptop, whereas a phone, they're surfing, Facebook or whatever. And even if they're using a work application, it's more of like an on the go kind of thing. It's not a deep immersive engagement, whereas your laptop is. So there are definitely differences.
That makes sense.
Yeah, but I think that the reality is a lot of what we as an industry have to do is a combination of technical solution, but also behavioral changes and sort of mindset changes when it comes to security.
Yeah, I mean, you're also seeing, though, this, it's a hybrid in the way that things are evolving. So you're seeing new kinds of learning models like federated learning rushing in to help address things like privacy concerns or considerations, where the model itself or model aggregators are actually the ones traveling to where the data doesn't move. And that may be not a laptop. It might be a laptop. It might be a server. It might be a medical imaging system in a hospital where that data is going to stay put and you're not going to move it at all. And now you've got the model coming and looking at it. So I think you're seeing both. And certainly you're seeing that in some industrial applications as well, where the machines are at the edge and they're not going to send their data back to a different kind of a server. They are the server. Or they're keeping it local, and then they're doing the training and updates there.
Yeah, we see a lot of that in the public sector space, right? Most of that has to do with classification of data or just the sheer volume of data, right?
Yeah, it's
hard to move a petabyte.
That's right. You become bandwidth limited with the data. Yeah. But what that means is you want intelligent devices at the edge to do something with the raw data. And once you bring it down to just interesting data, maybe that can be sent to.
Yeah, those are the models we actually see quite a bit of. So the big question is how do you secure that? Because a lot of those devices are not managed or not. No one's sitting in front of them. I guess they're managed kind of remotely, but
Well, you bring up another interesting sort of trend when it comes to security, and one that didn't start with the whole sort of COVID pandemic, but certainly has been accelerated by it. And that is, historically, the industry as a whole, not just Intel, but I'm talking about all technology for the most part, was, maybe with the exception of like military and espionage kind of things, was mostly focused on security as a something that could happen over the wire. That would be an attack, a network style attack, or maybe it's a malicious application. Maybe it's you got somebody to click on something, that kind of an attack. What we've seen, and Intel's certainly been on the forefront here, is to say that's not good enough. We have to be able to protect against physical attack.
Yeah.
And so physical attack being maybe those IoT devices that Camille was talking about that are sitting out there with no human attached to them, that nobody's watching them either. And they still have to be able to protect the data that's on them and still, protect against somehow being tampered with. And again, that's a super hard problem to challenge or to solve. But from an Intel standpoint, we made that decision now several years ago, that physical attack was absolutely in scope. And so now protecting a machine when somebody can now put probes and do all kinds of things in a lab setting, and you still have to be able to protect the data. That's the bar that we're operating to. We think it's the right bar, but it is a very, very high bar from a security standpoint.
No, obviously I do a lot in DoD, so I see that tamper-proof, mentality and data protection. That's another interesting thing I'm finding. People are more concerned now with protecting their data than their applications. And we've seen how that mentality has let people in. Like the SolarWinds attack is a great example of that. They forgot to test, they forgot to protect their pipeline, their build pipeline. They were protecting their data, but they forgot to protect their process. So the cyber criminals are getting brave, I guess, and smart.
Well, I think the other thing is the rise geopolitically and, for privacy concerns. So we say data, but let's be specific. I mean, there's IP and there's PIP. There's just personal information that people are concerned with. And I think security is almost a narrow scope term these days, because you can't have security. You can't really think holistically about security unless you're also addressing privacy, which, by the way, can be in direct conflict with security sometimes.
Yep, it can. Yeah.
And privacy has, while all humans pretty much agree on what it is, if they're giving a quick offhand definition of it, there's no agreed upon regulations or standards worldwide. So your company's got to figure out where you're operating and what the requirements are. And if you're going to hit the highest common denominator, or you're going to, address every geo.
Well, and those laws are still changing. I had a lawyer on my show recently that talked about data privacy from the perspective of healthcare. Oh my goodness. You want to talk about a convoluted mess, because data privacy does not mean restricting. It means also opening up data. And that you own your data, that concept that you own your data and you get to choose who gets to see it when. But that's mind-boggling to a lot of IT professionals. They're having a hard time wrapping their head around that one. So interesting stuff. Well, hey guys, this has been wonderful. Any parting notes for my listeners that normally don't deal with client machines or IoT as much? Anything you want to share with them?
I would just invite them, if they're interested, to talk more about security specifically and at the edge. I'd invite them to listen to our podcast, Cybersecurity Inside. And, Camille and I, we've had we've had people from all over the industry, not just technologists. In fact, usually not technologists. We've had, Olympic athletes. We've had U.S. lawmakers. We've had, industry sort of visionary type folks. And it's every week it's something totally different. So if you're interested in the space and just want to try to get smarter, we'd invite you to come listen.
Hey guys, thanks for coming on. This has been great. I can't wait to come on your guys' show so we can talk about digital transformation and security.
We'll be happy to have you.
Thank you for listening to Embracing Digital Transformation today. If you enjoyed our podcast, give it 5 stars on your favorite podcasting site or YouTube channel. You can find out more information about Embracing Digital Transformation at embracingdigital.org. Until next time, go out and do something wonderful.